So this is M66, which is regulations and equity. So the ultimate goal of all governments is freedom from exposure to environmental harm. So basically, for the people to be free of harm, and so they implement regulations in order to do this. And so that's kind of what this last section is about: is who does those, who regulates that, and what kind of regulations are they. So the environmental worldview, there's three types. There's human-centered, life-centered, and earth-centered. And so those are essential, all three of those are essential for sustainable environment. And so if we look at anthropocentric worldview, that's basically humans are centered. So nature needs to bend around us. It's an instrument that we use, and it's there for us to use. And then a stewardship is basically, it's not part of the three, but a stewardship is an intrinsic value to take care of the land. So even though some countries might have an anthropocentric worldview, they still find a stewardship to take care of that. They don't want to ruin the environment, but they have an intrinsic value to care for the earth. All right, so the biocentric view, this is all species, including humans, have equal rights. So that would be not looking at the earth, but just the biology, the living things. And then the ecocentric, that would be the earth is centered, and nature needs to adapt, or we need to adapt around nature rather than nature adapting around us. So the earth comes first. So basically just kind of a, looking at all of these together would be something that would be sustainable. So not one by itself, but all three of them together. And so countries, when they look at their policies are influenced by their worldview. So if they are one of those three, then those policies will be reflected in that worldview. And so in order to combat climate change, we need to have a precautionary principle, mainly because we don't have any current solutions to using fossil fuels. So there's nothing that's really going to 100% replace using of fossil fuels. So, we look at the amount of CO2 that we put in the atmosphere, and that's a major greenhouse gas. We know what greenhouse gases do as far as trapping heat. So we, but we don't understand everything about it. And so basically using a precautionary principle would be kind of the best approach rather than waiting and seeing, because if we wait and see, it might be too late. So looking at the world agencies, there is the UN, which is the United Nations. And so the basic goal of the United Nations is maintaining world peace. So there's 4 branches for the environment, and there's lots of branches to the UN, but only 4 for the environment, or 4 main ones. So there's the UN Environmental Program, there's the World Bank, there's WHO, and then there's the UN Developmental Program. And so those 4 take care of and kind of manage the environmental issues for the United Nations. So the first one, UNEP, which is the environmental program, the UN Environmental Program, they kind of manage the CITES and the Montreal Protocol for ozone, which we discussed in the last chapter. And then the World Bank, they educate and supply financial assistance for developing countries. So they also take the census. They're the ones that calculate the amount of people on Earth and all that. And then WHO, we've mentioned them quite a few times, but they monitor health trends and medical advice. So they just make sure that, kind of look and see like if there's outbreaks of certain diseases or where those diseases are tracking. And then the UNDP, that's better life through development. So helping developing countries develop is pretty much their goal. So then we've got some other agencies that are, they are not government agencies. They're just other agencies. And so those are agencies that aren't government related. But then we have U.S. agencies. So the first Earth Day was April 22nd, 1970. And that basically brings attention to the environment. And so what came from that is the EPA, and a lot of regulations, a lot of, things that are environmental, protection, acts and things. And so the main goal of, these U.S. agencies is to incorporate the balance of these 3 things. So environmental science, environmental equity, and intergenerational equity. So those are the kind of their main goals. But if we look at the things that came from the Earth Day, would be the EPA. So they are just implementing regulations based on research, based on education for the environment. And so the organizations that actually enforce it, one is OSHA, and so that's the enforcement of the health and safety regulations. And then we've got the Department of Energy, which advises energy sources, advances energy, looks at renewable energies for the U.S., and then our energy trends. And then the HDI, so this is the Human Development Index. It accounts for these three things. So life expectancy of a nation, adult literacy rate, and per capita GDP. And that's shown in this figure 66.3. And so if we look at these, the countries that, or the country that has the low human development with those three parameters would be mostly Africa. So you can see those, if you look at those three parameters, they have the lowest standard of living, or HDI, versus most of the very developed countries. They have the highest. All right, and then MPI, this is the measure of acute poverty in developing countries. So they look at the education, health, and living standards, and they kind of just analyze that. And so if we look at government policy making steps, there's five steps altogether. So ID the problem, and then formulate a policy, and then adopt the policy, implement it, and then evaluate it. And then there's, of course, lots of amendments, lots of changes that occur throughout that, but that's generally the 5 steps. And then there's a few other things here. The command and control approach, there's 2 approaches, command and control or incentive-based. So command and control involves regulations and they enforce regulations, whereas the incentive gives you incentives for doing the right thing. So, for example, if you buy energy appliances, then you can get rebates, things like that. So that's kind of the 2 mindsets, I guess, for enforcing legislation, enforcing these taxes or laws on here. So the green tax, this is kind of the incentive-based program. So environmentally harmful activities, they basically want to internalize the externalities. So we need to have the producers kind of take care of that and not put that on the consumers. So there's rebates for purchasing Energy Star appliances, rebates for putting in solar panels, things like that. So that goes along with the green tax. And then this triple bottom line, there's 3 things to be sustainable. There's economic, environmental, or social. And all 3 of these things are essential. So they basically incorporate the biocentric, ecocentric, and anthropocentric ideas. And so they're just a way for the government to kind of monitor and make sure that we are meeting these 3 standards to be a sustainable nation. And then this last portion up here, so 1/6 of the world's population lives in poverty. 770 million people is what that equates to. This table is a good review. So make sure you review all of these legislations and what they do. And we've talked about these throughout the last probably 5 chapters. So just make sure you review that for sure. And then this is the MDG goals. So read these bullet points, and that's for the MDG, which is the Millennial Development Goals. And that's something that's pretty new. And then environmental justice, this was touched on before, but basically fair distribution of resources. So developed nations aren't getting all of the resources and leaving nothing for developing nations. So that's just environmental equity for all. And then just this last little information, this is more about people making a stand for what they believe is right. And so a small group of people with a mission can make a big impact. So if you have the mindset of, I'm one person, what I do doesn't really change anything, think about the billions of people that might have that same mindset. Well, then, of course, nothing's getting done. But if you're the one person that decides that you can make a change, and there's other people that have that same mindset, then all of a sudden we have billions of people making a change. And that's kind of where this comes from. So basically just having the mindset that you can make a difference and legislation will follow. So people that are elected, they want to be elected again. And so if you, kind of swayed the way that they feel, as far as, they want your vote, then they will change their mindset. So, I got this from a video, but one of the good things about this video, good message, was that our leaders, so people like politicians, for example, they are our best followers, and they follow us based on how we feel because they want our vote. And so that concludes M66. I barely had time. I was